Welcome everyone to today's webcast, Data and AI for Traditional Trade Markets. So we have myself and my colleague Saishri. We're both data and AI consultants, and we have a lot of experience working with both traditional trade and modern trade channels when working with consumer goods companies over the past years that we've worked at Thorogood. Our details are on the screen there, so if you have any questions about the webcast, feel free to contact us. The QR code also brings you to our LinkedIn profiles where you can connect with us and ask us questions there as well. Outside of consumer goods, Saishri has experience in healthcare and pharmaceuticals, and I have experience in medical devices and insurance as well. So what's the agenda for today? Well, I'm going to be introducing Thorogood, and then I'll give a bit of a background to traditional trade markets, basically making sure everyone's on the same footing of understanding, because I know some people have slightly different definitions around traditional trade markets, and it varies from company to company. Then Saishri is going to look at some of the issues that come up with traditional trade data, and then she's going to talk about ways that we've handled those problems with other customers in the past and are currently handling them now with things like AI as well. Then she'll hand back to me, and I'll just cover off how Thorogood can help you get started and help you get more from your traditional trade data. So let me introduce Thorogood. If you haven't heard of us, Thorogood is a global independent data and AI consultancy. We're headquartered in London, but we have offices across the globe: Philadelphia, Boston, Singapore, where I'm based, Sao Paulo, and Bangalore, where Saishri is based. And we do a number of different consultancy services. I'd say the majority of the work that we do, though, is end-to-end data solution delivery. So actually building solutions on a customer's environment, usually their cloud environment, using all of our skills in data engineering, data visualization, and then increasingly more in data science, machine learning, and AI as well. And then where we really drive value is in the overlap between technology, data, and business focus. So whenever we work with a customer, we're going to really understand their business, and we're going to look at what are the problems that they're trying to tackle or what are the goals they're trying to reach. And then we can bring in our technology and data expertise to really work out how technology and data hand in hand can help them tackle those problems or meet those business goals. And we do it pretty well because we work with a lot of the largest and most successful companies in the world. So you'll recognize a lot of logos up there, and you can see that we work across sort of four main industries. So consumer goods manufacturing, health and life sciences, insurance, and banking. You'll also notice there's a few logos that don't fall into those industries. We basically do work with any company that is rich in data assets and is looking for our help to drive more value from those data assets. And then I mentioned the sort of overlap of data understanding, technology expertise, and business focus. The way we stay on top of the latest technology and keep that technology expertise up to date is by partnering with leaders in the space. So we partner with Microsoft, Google Cloud, AWS, and Databricks, and then we work with a large number of other technologies as well. That's given you just a little bit about Thorogood. Let me take you through sort of our understanding of traditional trade markets and sort of, as I said, put everyone in the same footing. So what are they? Well, the sort of dictionary definition would be the conventional system of buying and selling goods, typically through small-scale, locally owned shops and marketplaces, serving as the primary link between communities and their everyday needs. And then it can also be known, I know some people term it, some of the customers we work with term it as general trade or distributed trade. I know some people actually say there's slight differences between the three of those, but from the sort of high-level perspective we're looking at it, I think you can use the terms interchangeably here. And then just to give that sort of more wordy definition, a bit of an example, this is an example of traditional trade. So this is a photo I took of my friend Henry, who came to visit me in Singapore. And he's in one of Singapore's famous hawker centers. This one's actually People's Park, for those based in Singapore who may know it. And from the sort of consumer goods, large manufacturing organization perspective on traditional trade that we have from the customers we work with, they would look at this and see this as traditional trade. Yes, you've got independent, often family-run little stalls here. They might be selling noodles, they might be selling rice, different dishes and that, but there is often a lot of sort of drinks places. They could be selling kopi or lime juice, but they may also be selling large consumer goods companies' products. So for example, Coca-Cola or Pepsi, or even some of the beer companies, like they might be selling Heineken or Tiger here, as it's Singapore. So even the large consumer goods companies are selling through some of these very, very small mom and pop shop, very traditional small retailers. So how does that affect the sort of route to market? Well, I've got a sort of diagram here that should call it out and make it relatively easy to follow. So traditional trade, you have the manufacturer who's creating the product in their plant or in multiple of their plants, and then they will pass it on to a distributor or a sub-distributor who then might pass it on to a wholesaler who then eventually gets it to the retailer. And then the retailer is where the end consumer will actually be purchasing the product off the retailer, basically. And basically, traditional trade can have this many layers. It could have a fewer layers. It could have an even greater number of layers. But basically, the point is that there's not really a direct relationship between the manufacturer and the retailer, and therefore even sort of two more layers in between the end consumer and the manufacturer as well. The sort of counter to traditional trade is modern trade, which follows a much simpler pattern. If the sort of modern trade customer is big enough, this would be your sort of chain retail stores. So in America, your likes of a Costco or a Walmart. In the UK, the likes of a Tesco. In Singapore, the likes of a FairPrice. They obviously are chain stores with lots of stores that can vary by size. Some could be quite small. A lot of the majority of their sales come through sort of supermarkets. Basically, they're selling enough of the manufacturer's product that the manufacturer wants to either have a direct relationship with them, or maybe the relationship will pass through like one key distributor that they trust highly and they have sort of a licensing agreement with. But basically what you're talking about there is much fewer layers, a much closer connection between the modern trade customer and the manufacturer itself. And then, of course, the modern trade customer will be selling directly onto the end consumer. So the sort of distance between the manufacturer and the end consumer is smaller as well. That leads to a lot of differences, really, in terms of how they operate, but having this understanding helps us think about how it can affect business. So from a traditional trade versus modern trade APAC perspective, what I'm going to sort of call out is how the different countries place in terms of how much modern trade they have and how much traditional trade they have on this sort of spectrum here. These are approximations. They're based on my knowledge and my experience with the consumer goods companies I work with. The sort of share of traditional trade versus modern trade varies within countries. There's not always a specific number, and it's going to vary within each of the countries, and it'll change between each company and each sector of sort of types of goods that consumers are buying as well. So what I'm saying is basically this is a rough idea. It can be different for different companies as well. But in very general terms, if you're looking at APAC, the countries that are going to be more towards modern trade are going to be the likes of Singapore and Australia. So more developed economies with large sort of retail chain store brands. So if you look at Australia, for example, Coles and Woolworths are the two largest sort of grocers or supermarket chains in Australia. And they actually have 65% of the grocery market. Then if you're looking at something like Philippines and Thailand, they're more sort of 50-50, approximately 50-50 between traditional trade and modern trade. So a decent split. If you're a sort of consumer goods company, you really do have to be worrying about both within those countries. And then within the likes of an Indonesia or Vietnam, they skew much, much more heavily towards traditional trade, sort of mom and pop shops, etc. And this is particularly important for APAC because Indonesia is such a large market, particularly if you're only looking at like Southeast Asia. Indonesia's population is really significant and is a really large market to want to tap into. Then in terms of where a lot of these other countries will go, the sort of larger markets that are spending more on the sort of global consumer goods, they do tend to fall sort of more towards the modern trade side. I think there are exceptions to that. So I've worked with a customer who work purely on traditional trade through New Zealand, another customer who said they have a full distributor model in Japan. So it can have sort of these outlier cases, but generally these countries are a little more developed and are selling increasingly more through the sort of modern trade routes. Saying that, there is also a sort of new route coming along that ties in mostly with modern trade, and that's e-commerce. So the likes of China and Korea have a really large market share for e-commerce, and that's only going to grow. It's going to grow for other countries as well. And clients have told us in the past that 60 to 70% of their sales, this was in a sort of consumer health brand, 60 to 70% of their sales were going through e-commerce. So it's clearly an important space. And it's helping with people towards more modern trade as well. So you clearly cross APAC, a lot of modern trade, a lot of traditional trade. So how does actually the sort of traditional trade side of things affect business and how business operates compared to modern trade? Some examples in terms of like the operations of things can be, I've worked with like a confectionery company who sell a lot of different products, including chocolate products. In the likes of Indonesia, in terms of what they sell in Indonesia, a much larger share of it are their sort of simpler products. They're sort of just like simple chocolate bars or chocolate in jars or whatever. A lot of that'll be a much larger market share of what they're selling in terms of their total sales in Indonesia. Whereas in the likes of Singapore, a place that's very geographically very close, I have similar tastes as well. They sell a lot more of like complex chocolate pieces that need to be kept in AC or kept in cool environments to sort of maintain their structural integrity. And because Singapore works more through modern trade and has even like AC in a lot more of the stores, they're able to sell a much higher percentage of that more like complex structural integrity product. So that's like a difference just in terms of what you're selling and then what you're going to be pushing to consumers through different promotions and stuff like that as well. Another example would be we've worked with large CPG manufacturers that have ice cream divisions. And in a similar way, they need to ensure they have what's called a cold chain, which is basically freezers at all points of the supply chain, including transport, all parts between the manufacturer and how it gets to the consumer. And you can imagine that's just so much easier to control with modern trade, where the manufacturer might just be transporting it directly to the retailer with deliveries, maintaining cold storage there. And then the modern trade retailer just needs to put it into their freezers. And then it's going to hold basically for the customer. And that's important from a health and safety perspective. It's also important from like just a customer satisfaction perspective. If, for instance, you've got a sort of specific ice cream shape, you don't want it to have melted down and got misshapen to then have to sort of sell it on again. The consumer is not going to be very happy if it's melted along the way. So while that's a lot easier to control with the modern trade side of things, it makes it a lot more difficult to control on the traditional trade side of things. So traditional trade is just adding those sort of extra layers of complication in terms of how you get the product to the consumer. There's also generally issues around data, how you collect the data and how you analyze data from traditional trade markets. And to talk about that, I'm going to hand over to Saishri.
Thanks, Robbie. So far, we've seen what is traditional trade market and how it's still prevalent in today's world. Now we're going to discuss the different challenges faced while handling traditional trade data. We've categorized the data issues with traditional trade into 4 major headings, starting with lack of standardization. In traditional trade, the data collection and the management are often informal and inconsistent, leading to a lack of uniformity. Different stores may track sales, stock, and pricing in different formats, say, for example, having a CSV file or an Excel file or a zip file, and the sales can be tracked against their own local currencies and units of measures, which complicates data comparison across different regions. Even the product codes and the barcode systems aren't the same across stores and regions. This can be a case with modern trade as well, but the scale of it increases with traditional trade that deals with 3 to 4 times the number of distributors and independent retailers in the network compared to a modern trade. The second challenge is poor data quality. Distributors are a lot less consistent in feeding the data, which leads to incomplete or inaccurate data. And the majority of it is due to manual data entries, which again is the scale of it is higher in traditional trade. Examples of that could be quantities that are entered in wrong scale, missing exchange rates, wrong product mapping, and so on. The third challenge is time delay. Unlike modern systems where real-time updates are available, traditional trade data usually has a lag. There is often a delay between when a sale happens and when it is actually gets recorded. This causes the problems like businesses are not able to realize when they will run out of stock, which impacts managing their demand and supply. Another major challenge with traditional trade data, which is very different compared to modern trade, is zero sales data collected from distributors. Products are sold to distributors and you know how much is sold, but the data is not available on how much is sold by the distributors or the wholesalers to the retailers, which can lead to mismatch in tracking or monitoring sales data. Let's now look at the ways to handle the data problems that we just discussed. The first issue, as we just discussed, was lack of standardization, which is because of variety of data sources and formats. One thing to note here is that the approaches that we'll go through are dependent or they're based on some of the projects that we've implemented for our clients. but the scope to handle traditional trade data is very vast and is dependent on the data structure and the issues associated with it. The design of the solution is curated for the requirement and for the use case. The example that we're looking at here is an ingestion framework that we have developed for consumer packaged goods company with an aim to report sales data across all products and regions. Metadata is used to scale this framework across different data sources. In this project, the orchestration tool that we used was Azure Data Factory, and most of the transformations were performed in Databricks. Different file formats like flat files, SQL, SFTP were loaded into raw layer that holds the data in its original format. The naming convention that we've used in this project is based on the discussion and the design that we had with our client. But a general naming convention that's used in a medallion architecture is bronze, silver, and gold, which you might have heard before or familiar with. Next comes the processed layer, where source-specific and region-specific transformations will be performed. For example, handling column data types, creating calculated columns to bring in a common structure to the data. It also includes mapping files, for example, local to global product code mapping. When I say local product code, I'm referring to the product codes used by retailers specifically, which can be different across different retailers. But a global product code is an internal product code that is used by the manufacturer to identify a product. There were other mapping files that we had used in our project, which includes exchange rates, units of measure, which can also vary across regions. Finally, aggregation of data across regions will be performed in semantic layer to get a global view of sales, which is across countries. Along with what we just discussed in this flow, it is also important to perform data quality checks and exception handling on any data that is ingested. In this project, we have included common functions and code to identify such data quality issues across all data sets while loading the data from raw to processed layer. Some examples of mapping data and how it's used in the data flow and common data quality issues, the approaches to identify it, and the actions that can be taken based on the identification is covered in the next slides. Here is an example of a data mapping for exchange rate and product. For simplicity, we have considered only a sample data set for this example. We have sales data here for China and Singapore for two product categories, which is blender mixer and headphones. As you can see, the product codes in both the regions are different, even though they are for the same product. And the sales amount is available in local currency. But while we want to look at the sales data across different countries, we need to map these local product codes to a global product code, and exchange rates should be used to convert these local currencies into a standard currency, which in this case is USD. Here is an example of an exchange rate mapping file and the product mapping file. Exchange rate has the currency conversion for different countries, whereas a product mapping file has the mapping between local to global code mapping. This is how the final reporting looks like with aggregated sales data across different product categories and in a standard currency. So you can see that for a blender mixer, the total sales from China and Singapore is $181.6, which is calculated using the mapping files that we had here. The example here is just a sample, but this concept in the project that I was describing was applied at a large scale for different data sets across different regions, time zones, products, and channels to get a global view of sales for a category manager. Another example where standardization becomes important is while handling multilingual text. Data that is extracted from different sources like websites, flat files can have different regional languages, and the right encoding is required to interpret the data properly across different platforms irrespective of the region. In this example, we have used a standard encoding called UTF-8, which stands for Unicode Transformation Format, 8-bit, to read different languages and to ensure data integrity. Moving on to the data quality issues with traditional trade data. Traditional trade data, as you all know, is bound to have data quality issues due to the nature of data collection, which is more manual. Some of the data quality issues include invalid or mismatched product codes. For example, when the product ID or a product code does not match across different systems, or a missing or an incorrect data entry, often caused by manual errors or duplication of data that can lead to overcounting in reports, or be it granularity mismatch or having null values in key columns where it's not expected to have. Incorrect or incomplete mappings, such as if it's missing an exchange rate, currency conversion is wrong, or unit of measure is not consistent, and so on. To improve data quality, there are certain checks that can be performed during the ingestion process itself, which is referred to here as exception handling. These checks help to track incorrect data much before the data is reported for users. As I mentioned in the ingestion framework before, while loading the data from bronze to silver layer, there are functions that we have included to perform these checks in common across different data sets, which makes it more automated. For example, if there are null values or a duplicate entry in key column, these can be flagged and corrected at source, and it can be removed in the final reporting, which avoids inaccurate reporting. In the screenshot here, we can see that the checks like sequence in dates, null checks, duplicate checks are identified, and they are used to notify the relevant parties using alert mechanisms like email or validation reports for further actions like correction at source. Another way to spot data issues is by analyzing sales trends over time. By using visuals like line charts, bar charts, or scatter plot in tools like Power BI, businesses can quickly detect sudden spikes or drops in sales. For example, if the sale for a specific product, in this case it is blender in Singapore, there is missing data for an entire week, it could be due to the data entry mistake rather than actual sales drop. Other unusual fluctuations might be caused due to promotions, price changes, or supply chain issues, or even the actual error in the data itself. So, by continuously monitoring sales trends, businesses can not only track performance but also catch data inconsistencies early, leading to better decision making and more accurate reporting. In the project example that we looked at, using ingestion framework, we were able to reduce the development and processing time of the data flows to a large extent by moving the data flows for different sources or retailers into a common data architecture. This makes onboarding of any new data source for a new country or be the retailer much easier. We were also able to reduce the time and effort required in identifying and correcting multiple data quality issues using validation reports and alert emails that led to more transparency and much quicker actions. Further to identifying issues in data, we can also correct some of the issues using AI models. An example of that is included in the next slide. So this is a solution that we have implemented for a pharmaceutical company to predict if a product is dangerous using machine learning models. This helps in detecting and correcting the data if dangerous goods flag is either incorrect, or to predict the variable to fill in the gap when the data is missing. In this example, you can see that the dangerous goods flag is missing for the third product, which is predicted using a similarity model by identifying and quantifying the resemblance with other products. It comes with a confidence score that indicates the reliability of the match. But this is bound to regulations and would require human oversight. So, we've built an overall flow to run this model, and if the result of that is a low risk and a high confidence score, then the change is made directly. But if the risk is high and the confidence level is medium or low, in that case, it goes to a recommendation system where the business users can either approve or reject it. Let's now look at the third issue, which is time delays in data availability since the event occurs. Here is an example of a solution we've implemented for a global medtech company. They have monthly sales reporting cycle, but the challenge is that by end of the month, they don't know how much sales happened in that month due to the delay in availability of data. The direct sales to hospitals had a delay of almost a month, whereas indirect sales that happens through distributors had much more delay, which is up to 2 to 3 months, and data should also be cleaned and harmonized because it is from distributors, and that adds to the delay as well. In addition to this, there was uncertainty of whether quarterly revenue met the target, which led to conservative assumptions and on what is the revenue going to be by end of the quarter. And the leadership team used to underinvest because they have to maintain the profit margin. So we worked on developing machine learning forecasting application to fill in this gap using time series forecasting and experimented the prediction with machine learning models like linear regression, profit model, XGBoost, and so on. We are also exploring prediction of for more months that can help in demand planning. This was a successful proof of concept, and we are working on productionizing this approach currently. Lastly, let's take a look at the case where sell-through data or sales data from distributors or wholesaler is not available. As we discussed, this is kind of a blind spot where sell-in data is available and probably the point of sales data to consumers can also be made available from data providers like Nielsen or IRI, but sales sell-through data is not available from distributors. Here is an example where we've implemented a solution for a Fortune 500 global consumer packaged goods company with an aim to create a unified and collective data tool that consolidates internal and point of sales data for multiple markets. The reporting tool used in the solution was Power BI report, and the reports were accessed by multiple users across different markets. The solution has been live since 2020, and we started with around 20 markets at that point, which has now grown to 80 plus markets with 1,000 plus unique weekly visitors, which shows the adoption and the success of the application. In this project, business users are able to get a good picture of their sales by relying just on sell-in and consumption data. With this, I will hand over to Robbie to talk about how Thorogood can help.
Thanks, Saishri. So how can Thorogood help? We can help by basically sharing our experience. We have experience building these traditional trade solutions for consumer goods customers, so you can tap into that experience of how we built those solutions. So get in touch with me, get in touch with Saishri, or if you already know a Thorogood consultant, get in touch with them, and we can set up a meeting to discuss your business, the sort of problems you're having with traditional trade data, or if you haven't attempted to sort of work with traditional trade data, what data you can get or might have available. And then we can share how we've helped similar customers with similar scenarios to help derive more insights and value from their traditional trade data. More specifically, we can share our experience in the data ingestion framework stuff that Saishri talked about. We can talk about data cleansing and mapping and all the different techniques to harmonize your data. We can look at how we've detected and improved low quality source data with other customers and how that can apply to you. Obviously, building dashboards that are going to drive business value and building that on top of modern trade and traditional trade data and probably combining the two together. And then finally, you can help with all number of machine learning and AI techniques. For example, the forecasting one that Saishri talked through a couple minutes ago. So yeah, very happy to help with any of that. And I'll put up details at the end so you can get in contact with us in case you want to set up a meeting to discuss any of that. There is the details to do so. Other than that, thank you for attending today and have a great day ahead.